Now we also have DNA technology, so they can look at the molecular evidence for the DNA or the genome, compare the genome of different species and protein sequences, and they can determine how closely related humans are to chimpanzees or to gorilla or to orangutan. So differences can happen. Maybe we had common ancestor and there was a mutation that turned into different species, and then there was another mutation that turned into different species. So I'm going to show you another slide for that as well. So differences arose by mutation after the species diverged from the ancestral type. So if you're comparing these, this is, you can do the genome mapping for really cheap now, I think for $1,000, whereas it was millions of dollars before. So if you're looking at this, let's just compare the sequence, and you compare this with the chimpanzee. The only difference is this here, maybe 2% difference between humans and chimpanzees. Then you compare humans with gorilla. Now there is a little bit more difference here, and then also here. So there's some more differences. Maybe they differ by 10% or something. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm just giving you examples. So they can use this molecular evidence to compare the genomes and to see how closely related we are to other species. If you are really, I don't know if have you guys seen the movie Gattaca?
Yes.
I have when I was younger.
Long time ago.
So this movie was a science fiction back then. I think it was 20 years ago or something. So we didn't have all this DNA technology to get the genome sequence and all that, but we have that now. So you can only imagine what they're doing today might be, true in 20 years. Anybody knows where this name is coming from, Gattaca?
Is it from the codons?
It's from the codons. So we have A's and G's and T's and C's. So they took the codons and they came up with the name. So if you really want to see, what was happening 20 years ago, it was just a science fiction. And now we actually have those technologies. So you can compare those to see the relatedness of the species. So they can look at the amino acids. So they can compare the amino acids. So I don't care if you remember the cytochrome C. This is just an example. They used in a molecular comparisons. So when they're looking at the amino acid difference from humans and chimpanzees, there's not any. The rhesus monkey, there's 1. The rabbit, there's 20. The yeast, there's 40. So you can even compare humans to bacteria. There will be some similarities. But then there will be some key differences in the homeotic genes that make us humans versus maybe a monkey. So the more amino acid differences between species, the more distant the common ancestor. So compared on, based on these differences, you can say how closely or distantly related you are to another species. And they can do that using DNA technology. This is what I was talking about when I said if there was a mutation, it might have diverged into completely different species. So there's something called a molecular clock. They estimate the date when the evolutionary events such as mutation might happen. So here is the common ancestor. That's the nucleotide sequence for the common ancestor. Then they estimate every 25 million years later, there'll be a mutation. There's this one mutation. Then after 25 years, again, there's another mutation. Because of these two mutations, now they became different species. This is modern species 1, this is modern species 2, but they came from the same common ancestor. So that's a molecular clock that can assign dates to evolutionary events. It's not exact dates, but it's just an estimate. So there's that symbol here that's telling you it's around 25 million years. So if a gene is estimated to mutate once every 25 years, then 2 differences from an ancestor might arise in 50 million years. So in 50 million years, there might be 2 differences in this nucleotide sequence that give rise to a different species, and then this one becomes a different species. So you're using molecular clock to estimate the time when a mutation might happen in this case. 2 species that derived from a same common ancestor 50 million years might have a total of of 4 differences because it's happening every 25 years in each species. So if you count together, you have 4 total. One here, then another one after 25, another one here after 25, total 4. And then this is kind of going backwards, where it's going from more complex to simpler. We talked about these cave animals. So having maybe eyes is a little bit more complex, and they just decided not to have eyes because they can't see, it's dark anyway. So that's going from more complex, from complexity to more simplicity, basically. So evolution does not always lead to great complexity. Sometimes features are lost. If there's no use, they might be lost. Maybe there's still something left over from as a vestigial structure, but body doesn't waste energy into making something that might not have any use. Maybe originally they did have eyes, but over time they lost the eyes, went from being more complex to simpler, where it didn't need it anymore, so it didn't make them. So this cave salamandra has no eyes for pigment. Snakes lost their limbs as they adapted to burrowing lifestyle, because it might be difficult for them to go through these holes with those legs. So they lost the legs, they lost the limbs. But because they didn't have any use, gone from being more complex to a little bit simpler. So it doesn't have to go always towards the complexity, it can go backwards. I actually showed you this picture today when I showed you in Chrome. So fossil evidence shows that snakes descended from lizards with 4 legs and lost their forelimbs and then hind limbs. So here is, this is called phylogenetic tree, and this is showing the ancestor that had limbs. And all these different species came from this common ancestor. If there was a use of legs, maybe they still have legs. If the legs, they didn't really need legs, they lost limbs. So their ancestor had limbs. So that's why they have a vestigial structure left over from the ancestor, but they don't have limbs because they don't need it anymore. So fossil evidence shows that snakes descended from lizards because there's that vestigial structure that's left over. But because they didn't use or they didn't need the legs, they lost the limbs over time. So that's evolving backwards. So there's a question for you guys. This is about the biological clock. Mutations in gene occur at a rate of 1 nucleotide every 10 million years. The gene sequence differs by 6 nucleotides between 2 related organisms. How long ago did the organism split from a common ancestor?